Motor skill learning plays a crucial role in the performance of everyday tasks. The experiences of motor skill learning may range from relearning how to walk after a stroke, to coping with a demanding surgical operation, or acquiring a complex sports skill. It is widely known that task performance appears to improve in a consistent manner with practice, hence the saying, practice makes perfect. In regards to the amount of practice a learner undergoes, a potential way to support the learning process is to provide the learner with augmented feedback that supplements response-produced inherent feedback obtained from vision, proprioception, and audition of the learner. Augmented feedback is made up of two categories: knowledge of results, which gives information about the outcome of the performed motor skill, and knowledge of performance, which gives information about the movement characteristics that resulted in the outcome of the performed motor skill. Augmented feedback plays two critical roles in the motor learning process, the first being to help facilitate achievement of the action goal of the skill, and the second is to motivate the learner to continue striving towards the goal. McGill's research conducted in 1994 gives evidence as to how a learner can achieve a certain skill level with task-intrinsic feedback, but requires augmented feedback in order to achieve a higher level of expertise. The most prominent theory in regards to augmented feedback is Schmidt's schema theory, published in 1975. He proposes that slowed movements are feedback-based, but rapid movements are program-based and structured and driven centrally. Basically, this means that slow, deliberate movements are central around feedback from an external source, whereas rapid movements are dependent on the learner performing the motor skill. How is augmented feedback significant? Through the application of augmented feedback, a learner will receive a variety of things. It will assist in the motor learning of the skill they are performing. It can be used as a form of motivation as it influences the learner's perception of his or her own ability performing the motor skill. And it provides reinforcement by improving the chances of the learner replicating performance of the motor skill. The application of augmented feedback has determinacy on two things: the skill being learned and the stage of the learner. The first example of appropriate application of augmented feedback would be to look at a physical therapist giving augmented feedback to a stroke victim relearning how to walk. They would be providing the learner, i.e. the patient, with augmented feedback about the outcome of their movements, as well as the characteristic of their movement patterns. The second example identifies how augmented feedback is relevant in golf. As golf is primarily a result-based task, knowledge of results can be utilized to enhance the mode performance of the learner. From the knowledge of results, the instructor can use his subjective understanding of the movement characteristics required to successfully perform the task to help develop the performer's motor learning ability. Why is it easy to do more than one thing at the same time in one situation, but difficult to do the exact same things simultaneously in another situation? The answer to this question comes from the study of attention as it relates to the performance of multiple activities at the same time. Take, for example, a waitress who is holding a conversation with a customer whilst preparing meals. She would consider this a relatively easy task. However, if the restaurant suddenly became congested with demanding customers, she would have far greater difficulty holding the conversation whilst preparing the meals. This also applies to a basketball player, who may have no difficulty whatsoever dribbling the ball whilst calling plays in a practice scenario, but struggles to simultaneously perform both motor skills in a game-like scenario. The concept of attention is significantly involved in ways of improving the learning and performance of motor skills. Attention refers to our limited capability to engage in multiple cognitive and motor activities simultaneously, and our need to selectively focus on specific environmental features when performing motor skills. From a sporting perspective, visual attention to environmental context is essential in the performance of a motor skill. When used in the context of human performance, attention refers to several characteristics associated with perceptual, cognitive, and motor activities that establish limits to our performance of motor skills. A common view of attention is that it relates to consciousness or awareness. Attention refers to what we are or aren't thinking of, what we are or aren't aware of whilst performing a motor skill. Scientists have known for many years that we have attention limits that influence performance whilst multitasking. The most prominent theory based around the limitations of an individual's attention is the filter theory, more commonly referred to as the bottleneck theory, which suggests that a learner may have difficulty multitasking. This is because of the human information processing system, which performs each of its functions in serial order, some of which can only process one piece of information at a time. This means that somewhere along the stage of information processing, the system has a bottleneck, where it filters out information not selected for further processing. An elaboration of the bottleneck theory came in the form of Kahneman's attention theory in 1973. And whilst there have been other research conducted addressing flaws within this theory, it continues to serve as a useful guide to direct our understanding of some basic characteristics of attention-related limits on the simultaneous performance of multiple activities. Kahneman views attention as a cognitive effort, where he indicates there are mental resources required to carry out specific activities. Within Kahneman's theory, there is a central belief that arousal significantly influences an individual's attention capacity. Arousal is the general state of excitability of a person and reflects the activation levels of the performer's emotional, mental, and psychological systems. Research suggests anxious players may become unaware of important information they should be paying attention to, while excitement can lead to players to narrow their focus and miss important information. Arousal can be altered due to the attention demands required of the performer. An example where arousal would be low based on the attention demands of performing the task required would simply be kicking a soccer ball by yourself in the park. The arousal level and attention span of the individual would be considerably altered if they were competing in a World Cup final. This change of environmental context and task demand may result in arousal level becoming too high, meaning attention would still not be at its optimal level. It is important to understand how essential attention can be in the development of motor learning. It may seem obvious to say that a player who pays more attention to what they are doing during a motor skill will produce a higher level of performance than a player paying less attention. As a future physical educator, I must have a comprehensive understanding regarding the learning demands and requirements of my learners. By being able to understand the diverse nature of each individual's attention capacity and how it is distributed, will assist in the limitation of external influences so that an inexperienced learner may be able to develop the motor learning of that particular skill. A good example of this would be a soccer player stepping up to take a penalty that could potentially win the game. His level of arousal and the numerous environmental contexts influencing his attention capacity could be limited by implementing strategies into his training regime that will enhance his ability to remain attentive and focus on executing the motor skill. As a future physical educator, I must have a comprehensive understanding regarding the learning demands and requirements of my learners. By being able to understand the diverse nature of each individual's attention capacity and how it is distributed, will assist in the limitation of external influences so that an inexperienced learner may be able to develop the motor learning of that particular skill. Self-talk is described as words, phrases, or cues players recite to themselves before, during, or after the execution of a motor skill, and are understood to be instructions or actions. Research has found it can have a positive impact on both elite players and beginners, helping them to focus their attention on the motor skill. Attention is a concept that could be appropriately used in a majority of motor skill performances. It is essential for coaches to utilize strategies that promote attention within beginners so that they may better develop their motor learning of a particular skill. Consider an under-6 soccer coach. If he is trying to teach a learner how to pass the ball, he isn't going to introduce running and passing simultaneously straight away, is he? He will make sure they understand the passing of the ball while standing, then introduce running and passing of the ball. This will enable the inexperienced learner to focus the majority of their attention, as well as develop a comprehensive understanding of performing the motor skill. The second example would be to look at an elite hurdlist who is preparing themselves for the upcoming Commonwealth Games. So that they are totally prepared, they utilize attention strategies that will enhance their ability to focus on specific factors of their motor skill performance. An in-depth understanding of attention is required for motor learning. No matter the ability of the learner or the environmental factors influencing motor learning, applying attention is relevant in a majority of situations. Relating back to Kahneman's theory of attention, it's how we divide our attention that results in the performance of motor behavior. A part practice approach involves the positive transfer between the broken down individual skills and the task as a whole. It involves any method of simplifying the performance of a skill involving either the initial practice of component parts of the skill or the simplification of environmental features in which the skill is performed. Take for example an infant trying to drink from a cup. Whilst this may seem a relatively mindless task for a majority of people, an inexperienced learner, such as the infant, will have trouble mastering the motor skill. In this scenario, a part practice approach to successfully executing the motor skill is required, as the learner will have to break the motor skill down into several key components. They'll first have to analyse their environmental context, grasp the cup, lift it to their mouth, then drink from it, before placing it back down. Part practice is most commonly utilised when the skill is high in complexity and low in organisation. Complexity refers to the number of parts and components, as well as the degree of information processing that characterise a skill, whereas organisation identifies the relationships between a motor skill and the components required within the skill. Based on Naylor and Briggs' hypothesis, assessing the levels of complexity and organisation of a skill, as well as determining the relationship, helps the practitioner decide whether or not to use the whole or part practice. The theory behind part practice is that a learner can effectively practice and refine parts of the skill that require improvement, without having to essentially practice the already mastered components of the whole skill. By practicing part of the skill allows the performer to concentrate in the areas he or she needs most improving. This results in a more efficient and less time-consuming process of motor skill learning. An example of how part practice may be a better option in a different circumstance would be to look at a young cricket player. If they are practicing in the nets with a bowling machine set on a specific line and length, at a specific pace, they can focus on improving that one particular shot. This, however, differs in comparison to a professional cricket player who would have no doubt already mastered that one particular shot, and is reliant on a whole approach to practice, where they can have different bowlers bowling at different lengths and pace.